Okay, there. Great. So first off, this is the agenda. We're going to talk about the goals as a PUD. So some of the high level goals that we have as an organization. And then we'll talk briefly about our core customers and who our core customers are. So for the customers that are the focus of this presentation tonight, you are in the core customer group. And this is a designation by our commissioners, and we'll talk a bit about that. We'll talk about growth and how that's affecting Grant PUD. Growth also brings the power load increases that we need to have for serving that growth. And then what we're looking at for new power generation resources, plus how we determine the cost of service for our customers and what it costs to serve them, a rate making policy, and then we're going to also talk about multiple ways to where customers can provide us with feedback, including tonight. We want to give folks in the room and then also joining us virtually opportunities to give us feedback. As I mentioned, this is the second in a series of meetings that we have. The first one was for our ag customers. And then we also have on May 21st, a meeting for our industrial customers and then residential customers, which will be in this auditorium from 6 to 8 p.m. on May 21st. And then June 4th, we plan to have an all rates wrap up meeting where we're going to talk about some of the things that we heard during these workshops and what we will be presenting to our commissioners for their consideration. So let me just introduce our panel here. We have Ty Ehrman, just raise your hand, Chief Customer Officer. And then we have Carrie West, Senior Manager for Customer Solutions. John Bartlett, Managing Director for Energy Supply Management. Dupree Stanley, Financial Analyst for Rates and Pricing. Julio Geary is joining us remotely via Teams. He is the Program Manager for Rates and Pricing. And then if there's any questions that come up that Julio would be able to answer, he can do so via Teams. And then, of course, I wanted to introduce our commission. And if you could just raise your hands when your name's called. Tom Flint, President. Terry Pyle, Vice President of the Commission. Larry Scatman, who's our Secretary. There we go. Thank you, Larry. Judy Wilson, Commissioner. She was our president last year, so she gets a turn to not be president this year. And then Nelson Cox couldn't make the meeting today, but he's also one of our commissioners. Rich Wallen, I believe, is joining us virtually via the Teams link, and he's our general manager. So with that, I just wanted to point out that there will be an opportunity for Q&A after the presentations, but if there are any questions pertaining to the presentation itself, feel free to ask the questions, raise your hand, and then Annette is going to be monitoring the Teams link. And if a question comes in where we need to have clarification during the presentation, great. And then if you have some general information for us, you can give that after the presentation. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ty to start the panel discussion.
Goals for today.
Oh, okay. I was ahead of myself. Yes, so one thing that we do want to talk about a little bit is just what are our goals as a utility? First off, how does Grant PUD want to go forward with our rates? That's the big question. We know that we're likely going to have rate increases in the future with rising costs, inflation pressures, things like that. But how should we allocate for those costs with our rates? And then how should we address those increasing costs as a utility? How do we leverage our rate strategy to benefit customers and communities? And then if we look long term, and let's say over a 20-year horizon, where do we want to be as a community? How do we want to grow? Grant PUD is as part of that, as a power provider for our county. How do we balance the needs of core customers and the needs of industry? And then how do we address rising costs from inflation and legislation? So those are things that are kind of on our mind. And that's what our commission has asked for us to reach out to our customers to get input from them so that they can help to answer these questions. Sorry about that, Ty. We missed that important part. Thanks for keeping me on my toes. Now I will turn it over to Ty.
All right, thank you, Chad. So we'll talk first about some of our strategy that we've established here at PUD. And we've worked over the course of the last year to really hone in on what we want to accomplish in the next 35 years as a utility. So from the work that we've done there, we've got a pretty focused direction on what it is we want to accomplish as a utility for our customers. And you're seeing right now on the screen kind of the high level overview of what it is we're trying to accomplish. And it all centers around our anchor statement, which is a focus on our core electric customers while still ensuring the success of all of our customers. And we'll get into some further discussion about core customers and how they factor into the way that we make decisions. But I also wanted to touch on, out of the 5 areas, 3 of them that are really central to what we're talking about today. And just further reinforce the fact that we've got to focus on customers as a major component of our strategy moving forward. So the first one is number 1 up on the screen there, ensuring long-term affordable rates for our core electric customers. Our customers have sent us the clear message that affordability of rates is utmost top priority for them. And so we are reflecting that in our strategy. Then I'm going to jump around a little bit. Number 4 here is developing an intentional power demand strategy. And you'll see with some of the discussions we're having today, increasing growth and restrictions on the generation sources that we've got out there mean that we've got to have a dedicated approach to how we're managing both the demand of power in our county as well as the supplies that we're going to use to serve that demand. And then number 3 is committing to accurate and responsive customer service. As we are providing power and doing so at affordable rates, we also want to keep in mind that providing accurate and responsive information to our customers as part of our overall offering is really, really critical because all of our customers are making their personal, household, or business decisions with the information that we provide them. And we want to make sure and deliver the best way possible for them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie.
Yeah, thanks, Ty. This slide is distinguishing between our customer classes, which ones are core customers and which ones are non-core customers. And I'll talk a little bit about the difference between the two. And our core customers have been designated by our Board of Commissioners. Residential rate schedule 1, irrigation rate schedule 3, and general service small commercial rate schedule 2, and then large general service large commercials rate schedule 7. And in terms of rates, there's benefits of being a core customer, and the main benefit is when Dupree's going to talk a little bit about our cost of service and looking at what we charge in rates for our core customers. Currently, our pricing is favorable for core customers, and it's either our rates are at or below the cost of service for each of those rate schedules and customer classes. And how we go about doing that is from the non-core customers who are paying a little bit more or a lot more above their cost of service. So that additional revenue stream from those non-core customers are benefiting the core customers. And so that's the real main benefit, for our core customers. Okay. This next slide is just a snapshot of where we ended the year 2023 in terms of customer count. Actually, this is meter count between our different customer classes. So you'll see residential is at 41,776 meters. Industrial meters are 281, commercial 7,914, and irrigation at 5,041. And below, for the year 2023, what was billed to each of those rate schedules. And so in total, you'll see $272 million of billed revenue. And the consumption or kilowatt hours billed was just under, if you convert that to megawatt hours, just under 6 million megawatt hours is billed. Again, the core customers, rate schedule 1, rate schedule 2, and 3, and 7 on that chart at the bottom.
So what you see here is a graph of our load growth over time. So see this line right in the center of the screen, that's the beginning of the forecast period. We look to your right, and before that, it's the actuals period. So a couple things to keep in mind when you look at this. That top bracket or that top color, that maroon color there, those are our industrial customers. So I think anyone can look at this graph and say, oh, it looks like your industrial customers are growing at a faster rate than the rest of your customers. And that is a true statement. So that growth really started to pick up post 2018. So up to 2018, from 2008 through that period, we had roughly 3.5% or so, 3.6% growth rate. But from 2019 through this year, through the end of 2023, that ticked up to 4.3%. And the majority of that is driven by industrial loads. You also see that ex post this year, that also continues to increase and has a pretty sharp incline there. So post that period from 2024 all the way through 2035, you've got, it ticks down a bit to about 3.6% again. But what you see in the industrial class is that it's taking up a larger and larger share of that load. So you ask yourself, what's driving this load? Some of it is the data centers, which get quite a bit of attention. So that growth has increased and is the majority of that load. But also keep in mind that Grant County is very, very attractive to any industrial growth. We have an interstate freeway that bisects us. So whatever you produce in Grant County can be put into the transportation system very quickly. And not only do we have a great price of power, but we also have great land prices here. So if you need to develop significant land, you need to bring on maybe up to 100 individuals into your workforce. This is a very attractive place to be. So there's lots of things that drive that. But keep in mind, it is that industrial growth which is driving our load growth. So what does that growth materialize into? It's right here in our current IRP, which is our integrated resource plan, which is a way that we go about doing our planning. This is the short position that our planning has to go out and meet. So we do not have currently enough resources in 2026 to meet the load growth. That number 217, those are megawatts. So we're 217 megawatts short in 2026. There's a little wrinkle there in 27 versus 28, but 28 forward, that continues to decline, and that is a function of that load growth. So the integrated resource plan identifies the least cost way we would bring on new resources to meet that short position through time. And if numbers aren't your focus, this is another way to look at that. So this really is circumspect specifically to our situation here at Grant County PUD. That red line that is at an escalation, that is our load growth. The blue line is our Priest Rapids project. So that is where we have historically gotten the majority of our power by a vast margin. You see that line that bisects and goes up for 2024. So right now, we're right at the cusp of using all of those resources. In 2026, you see where the red load growth line is above that blue line. And we recognize that's that 217 megawatts that we're short. So numbers aren't your thing. This is something that you can keep in your back pocket. All right, so what are we thinking about in terms of meeting this load growth? I'm going to start on the right there and just talk about the resources that we've considered. So to meet that short position, we've gone out and done a lot of discovery work around small modular reactors. Historically, the price to deliver power from Priest Rapids project onto the rest of our system has been approximately $20 to $25 over the last few years. That nuclear small modular reactor will be between $80 and $100, and that's on a megawatt hour basis. So that's an all-in investment cost. So when we think about the next set of resources we want, recognize they're going to be significantly more expensive than what we've had access to. Hydrogen is an order of magnitude more expensive than nuclear, but it was intended to only run for short periods of time. Wind is approximately $60 to $70 a megawatt hour, and solar is also approximately $60 to $70 a megawatt hour. So when we look out at the world and we say, what can we go and get replacement power for this new load? It's all going to be more expensive than the Priest Rapids project. Also know that we're not just looking for the renewables, which will need to be a considerable part of the solution, but we're looking at those firm dispatchable resources that can help us balance our system and be on call on demand. Those are generally more expensive than the renewables, but we recognize we've got to have a weight between the two because we've got renewable portfolio standards in the state of Washington to meet, and it just happens to be that what the market is offering up right now is a lot of renewables. So currently we have a request for a proposal out, and I think all but 2 respondents were renewables. So recognize what the market is offering up to us right now isn't necessarily dispatchable resources.
I want to touch just briefly on our rate increase history has been over the last 10 years. So you can see this chart includes rate increases by year over the last 10 years by rate class, by our individual customer types. And we don't have to get into as much of the individual rate classes here, but do want to just note here that we did have 4 years of no rate increases. Right there in the middle, you see the trough that's created. And that's a good thing for customers, certainly not to have rate increases. So don't want to say that that's necessarily a bad thing. But what we do want to be mindful of as we consider what our rate policy is going to be is what do we want to send to our customers in rate increases in terms of volatility. And we are concerned at times that we may have times when there's 0 rate increases and then a significant rate increase after that, and wanting to not subject our customers to that. So strong desire on our part to make sure that we get input from you all today on what you'd like to see in that area. And certainly one thing that we could say is that an alternative might have been, rather than having those 4 years of 0 rate increases, we could have had very small ones, maybe 0.75%, that in the end made the last 2 years of increases that we have, 23 and 24 increases, be smaller and more in line with that, rather than having the zeros and then the relatively larger increases. The other thing I do want to point out too is that the last 2 increases, while they have been non-zero, and not insignificant, they are still relatively modest compared to what we've experienced in the inflationary scene. So we take any increase to our customers seriously, and we want to keep those as low as possible. But I do think it's important to point out that we have been able to keep them low relative to the inflationary pressures that we've seen out there in the market as well. So with that, I'll pass it over to Rachel.
Okay, so I'm going to go over the cost of service study. So the cost of service study is a tool that's used by a public utility to ensure that the rates they charge their customers match the cost to provide service to those customers. So basically in our cost of service study, we do use methodologies that are approved by FERC and that are used industry-wide. Grant PUD's cost of service is based on actual costs and actual loads. So ours is a backwards looking model. We currently use 2021 data, but we are updating the cost of service study to use 2023 data and should have that done by the end of the summer. Grant PUD collects its cost over time. So we use an accrual cost recovery method for our large projects and for the costs that are incurred to fund those large projects. We take those costs, they're depreciated and allocated over time. And this allows us to make sure that the rates we use stay steady, easy to predict. So while the cost of service study gives us a picture of what our costs are to serve our customers, our rate making guiding policy principles are used to ensure that we set rates fair for everyone. They are sufficient. They should be designed to provide the utility a reasonable opportunity to recover its costs. They should be predictable and acceptable. So they should be simple and easy to understand and relatively stable over time. Our rates should be price efficient, so they should provide customers with accurate price signals and discourage wasteful usage. And all of these three combined ensure that our rates are fair and equitably distributed among our customers. That helps us to avoid any undue discrimination. So all of this combined is sent over to Commission. Commission makes our rate making policy. Resolution 8768, which is now known as 9039, was just recently what's the word? Redone.
Reset.
Reset. Okay. So it was approved back in 2015. One of the main goals for that is gradual movement towards commission targets. So our targets are set at 15% above the cost of service and 20% below the cost of service. That helps us to reach goal number 2 of stable and predictable rate increases and to avoid rate shock. So any increase that we have, the system average per rate class should be set at 0.25 times below and 2.5 times above the system average. The rate making policy also sets goal number 3 to define core customers and preferential access. So as Carrie discussed earlier, our core customers are residential, general service, irrigation, and large general service. But our most benefited customers are those residential and irrigation customers. Our preferential access is set at 10 megawatts of access to increased rapid pressure. So anything that we grow outside of our capacity, we'll have to use other rate making alternatives in order to recover those costs. So that leads me to goal number 4, which gives Commission the option to explore those other rate making alternatives. One example that we already have in place now is rate schedule 17. That one is our evolving industry rate, and it currently has crypto customers being served under that rate. Crypto customers have a premium adder to cover any industry specific risks. This rate making policy actually is basically set to expire at the end of this year. So we are really looking for a lot of feedback to ensure that Commission has all the information they need to be able to update this policy. Okay, so this graph shows the difference from our full cost of service to the actual rate that was set in April of 2024. The blue dotted line that you see here at the top shows our 15% above cost of service. The orange dotted line at the bottom shows 20% below cost of service. And then the solid line through the middle shows our at cost of service rate. So starting with our core customers, we have residential and irrigation at 29% below and 27% below cost of service currently. We have general service and large general service currently being served right around cost of service. And then for our non-core customers, we have industrials paying 16% above cost of service, large industrials at 49% above, and ag processing at 5% above the cost of service. So the fact that we have our non-core customers paying their rates at a profit ensures that we're able to keep our core customers at or below the cost of service. So I will turn it back to Carrie.
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina. This next slide is looking at a system wide of where does your power bill go? And I really like this slide because if you look at the center, it's a dollar bill. And if you break it down on every dollar that you pay on your PUD bill, 61 cents or 61% of that goes to generation, goes to generating that power to meet that load. And then down below that, once it's generated, then it has to go on the transmission lines. And so paying for that expense, that's 5 cents for every dollar that's going towards transmission. And then you jump up to the far right quadrant is our distribution. So once it goes from transmission, it's our distribution lines and gets down into homes and businesses to serve that load. So 24 cents on the dollar goes towards distribution. And then down below is 10% for customer expense. And that's our billing system to send out bills. It's the administrative and general expenses that are incurred, just our business operating costs that are to serve you all. And so that's 10 cents on the dollar is going towards that. I sense you do see a CSR in that picture. I do want, it's a plug that I missed this morning, but just to promote our some customer service reps that are here to serve. This is one of our CSRs, and she just recently started a few months ago. She's doing a great job. We have expanded our call center hours and days of service to customers. So currently it's 7 days a week from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. that they're available by phone to serve our customers. So just wanted to put that little plug in. Okay, and the next slide, where do costs show up on your bill? And so there's really three primary buckets, if you will, that make up your bill. The first one is the basic charge. And this is a fixed charge, and it could be either a daily fixed charge or a monthly fixed charge. And so this is covering costs for our call center, our CSRs, business support, that overhead to cover that component. The next one is the demand charge, and this is per kW. And capacity and demand related costs such as transmission lines and operations and maintenance of those lines, including our distribution lines, and a portion of some generation expenses are captured through that demand charge. The next one, which is in the center, is our energy charge, our flat or block rate per kilowatt hour consumption. And so that is capacity and demand related costs not collected through the demand charge, but it does cover other variable energy costs. And so currently we have tiered rates for some of our rate schedules. For rate schedule 2 and rate schedule 7, there is just one tier for energy charge for rate schedule 2. And for rate schedule 7, there is a 2-tier component of that energy charge. So the fourth one doesn't apply to commercial customer class. The capacity charge is only applicable to our irrigation customers. And so we covered that one this morning at the irrigation workshop. So when you sum all of that up, that's your total on the bill that you receive on a monthly basis.
So that really wraps up our slide deck here. Just asking if there's any questions. I know we have a few online, a few customers online. And I don't see any questions right now, but we'll give you a couple minutes to think about if you have any questions. One of the questions that came up this morning is, why don't we just have one rate that covers everybody? So Ty, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I might actually defer to the tree, a little bit of a lead in, but part of the reason that we don't is because the way that our different customers use electricity is different. And so for our average residential customer, you've got electricity use that varies over the course of the day, and it may peak in the morning and then level out and then peak again in the afternoon. And overall, compared to the maximum amount of electricity that they use, if you were to average it all out, would be relatively low. We call a low load factor. I don't know what a typical load factor is for a residential customer. Maybe that's something we'll research and come back to, but it's low. And then for the other end of the scale, our industrial customers, they are at a quite high load factor. So when we build out the system for them, they end up utilizing the amount of wire that we have to put in to a large degree, to a very high level most of the time. And because of that, we really got to consider what is the most appropriate way to charge those customers. Ultimately, when we say this kind of in one term, our large industrial customers are very efficient users of the system because they tend to fill that pipe and use it to a maximum, fairly maximum degree all the time. And most of our other customers do not. Another example of that is on the irrigation side. They're using the system 7 months of the year. So there's a full 5 months of the year when they're not using the system or very little using the system. And so we've got to build out all the infrastructure ultimately for the maximum amount of usage. Those who use more of that system, we can charge a lower per kilowatt hour charge in order to match what their costs are.
Yeah, you covered it. I don't really have much to add to that.
I should talk less, I think, yeah.
Great. Still don't have any chats. I think one of the final questions to ask tonight is probably, we have a lot of industrials, and what happens if an industrial gets up and leaves and stranded costs, thoughts around that scenario.
You want to cover that, hey, John?
I think you covered it well today, Ty.
Okay, so, yeah, talking about talking too much. So, we get asked this question every so often. What if we raise rates to the point where industrials end up leaving the county? And first of all, let me just say upfront, I don't think anyone at the PUD wants their legacy to be running businesses out of the county. And I certainly feel that way. That being said, it's a fair question because right now we do have some of the most competitive rates around. And we know that as we add generation resources, they're going to cost us more. We are going to have to charge our industrial customers more. So, the question about what would happen is a real one. That being said, I'm going to pass it to John in a minute. He'll talk about sensitivity studies on the price side. But ultimately, if we did end up with our industrials leaving the county, we've got kind of a mixed bag of effects on the PUD. And I will say that effects on the PUD ultimately end up being effects on our customers because we are owned by our customers. But the mixed bag involves basically, we would have built out infrastructure, transmission lines, distribution lines, substations, that sort of thing, in order to serve those large industrial customers. And if they left, we would be stuck with those assets and need to continue to spend money in order to either maintain them or take them out. So that would be on the negative side. On the other side, we would end up with a little bit of a mixed bag on the generation side. The one, we wouldn't need to go out and source some of these more expensive costs, more expensive generation sources. And ultimately, the generation that they did not use, if they did leave, would end up getting used by us in whatever way ended up being most financially favorable. So we could sell it to other utilities, we could sell it on the open wholesale market. But there's increased volatility that comes with all of that and exposure to the market. And so it would be more financially advantageous to us, but it would be more volatile and less sure than our current rate structures. Pass to John maybe to touch on any holes I left.
So this is something we considered, and we recognized one element of that equation that we didn't know the answer to, and that gets back to our slide with the cost of service and the for $1. We're charging $1.50 for the large industrial customers. What is their sensitivity to that price point, and when do they start thinking about maybe Grant County isn't the right place for me to do business? There's two parts of that question. One is knowing what that point is and understanding it, and that's something we don't necessarily know right now, which is one of the reasons we're standing up the Energy Supply Management Business Unit, is to answer those sorts of questions. But embedded in that is we also recognize that the growth is driven by the industrial loads, and we are a firm believer in the cause of cost, bear cost principle. And so as the growth continues to hit us, we want to be able to send a price signal that lets those customers, whether they're current customers or their potential customers, the right price signal that they can make the right choices about their business. So people often think about, well, it's just about raising costs, but it's also communicating that out to folks so that they can make good business decisions. If they make a business decision that says they're going to leave our system, then I think Ty outlined exactly one of the things you'll have to deal with, and that is you may have some assets that are stranded and that you'll have a difficult time dealing with. In terms of generation, it provides us an opportunity to go into the wholesale market and sell that power. One of the things to offset that risk that we currently do is those large industrials, as they come onto our system, we have them bear the costs associated with building specific assets for them, specifically around transmission and distribution assets. So we do our best in the system we have now to mitigate those risks. So.
Yeah, great. The other thing I do want to point out is that industrial growth up to this point has been beneficial for keeping rates low for our core customers. And that's because back when we put dams in, it came with strings attached. We only got to use the power that we produced to the degree that it served our own load. Everything else we produced beyond that had to be sold to regional utilities at production cost. And so as our load has grown, we've gotten to reclaim more of that power. And because we charge our large industrials above their cost to serve, that additional large industrial growth has been sold to them at a profit and used to keep core customer rates low. So growth up to this point in the industrial side has been beneficial. We've got to keep a watch on it from this point on as we have to bring on more expensive generation resources and allocate it toward those customers that are causing the growth.
Great. Well, I think that pretty much covers it. Thank you to those that have joined us online. You will notice that there is a QR code on the screen, and this will link you to all of the materials that we covered this evening. And it also gives you an opportunity to offer your feedback, because this truly is a conversation that we want to have with our customers to find what direction do you as our customer, which are really our ratepayer owners, what direction do you want to go towards in the future? Where do you want to see Grant PUD in the next 20 years? So appreciate that
I
feedback.
have a question.
Oh, we do? Oh, thanks. Great, I'm gonna read yours, is that okay?
Go for it.
As you deliberate on the potential price increase for industrial customers, how do you intend to balance the need for revenue with the principle of fairness across rate classes? While it may be tempting to alleviate financial strain by targeting one specific group, how can we ensure that any adjustment to rates reflects equitable distribution of costs among all stakeholders? Furthermore, what measures are being considered to mitigate any disproportionate impact on industrial customers who may already bear a significant burden of the cost? Gosh, there's like 3 or 4 questions in there. Ty, do you wanna take a stab at it?
Yeah, let me continue reading here. So in terms of the first question, how do you intend to balance the need for revenue with the principle of fairness across rate classes? Let me ask John to weigh in a little bit on this too, but our intention is to continue to measure the costs that it takes to serve each of our rate classes, understand what that is, understand relative to that, what are we charging? And then take a look at other data points. And John mentioned price sensitivity. If we take a look at kind of the electricity market as a different market, say one in which we're looking at all utility providers across the nation and where all the industrials can locate our pricing compared to those other utilities, that's another market look that we can pay attention to and compare how are we priced within that market, because it's another look at fairness when it relates to that customer class. And we're going to continue to provide all the information on these data points and others back to the commission so that ultimately we can make the most educated decision on how we set those rates. It doesn't necessarily always mean that we will set rates on a percentage comparison to cost of service, but we certainly want to have that information to compare against. It's not given to measure though. And John, if you want to touch base on that too.
Yeah, if we go back to the Venn diagram slide. So the things to highlight here is this is our method for doing this. To that first question on balancing the need for revenue and the principle for fairness. And this is how we do it. You know, this is a conceptual representation, but we make calculations as to our revenue requirement. And that identifies, do we need to ask for an increase that will sufficiently cover our costs and all of our other financial metrics? Are we doing it in a way that is predictable and acceptable to our customers? And then the other one is this price efficient, i.e. are we sending these signals to folks, letting them understand beforehand if this is coming and it is spread out in a way that makes sense to the cost causers? And you put all those 3 together and it should be as fair as we can make it given those considerations. That's all I would add there, is that this is our method.
The other thing I might add too is that we have been pretty deliberate about making sure that as we look at bringing on more expensive generation resources, and they will be significantly more expensive, as John touched on, that we're not going to put the cost of those additional generation resources onto the core customers. And we've been pretty clear on that all the way throughout. You know, that being said, we're not looking to put an unnecessary burden on the industrial customers that we have just because the growth is occurring in that area. But we have been clear that, to use the term that we have, the rate class that causes the cost will bear the cost. And the folks that have been here, or the rate classes that have been here for a long period of time, will continue to enjoy the cost of that lower cost Priest Rapids project power. Touch on.
Okay, I think you touched on all the different points. Hopefully that answers your question, O. If you would like more information, please respond back. We also have a question here from Jimmy. You mentioned an intentional demand response program at the beginning. What effort has been made towards implementing a demand response program? And how much could that impact the cost of service if certain industrial loads like crypto that could be shedded in hours notice during high cost power periods? You want to take that one, John?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm not sure we mentioned a demand response program, but this is a great question. So a demand response program that gets implemented and starts reshaping loads, that gets fed into the data set, and over time, it just feeds into our cost of service as it gets developed. So the longer they're in your data set, your loads, they begin to influence your cost of service. But it does take time. You've got to stand one up and you've got to let it have some cycles to be in the data set. But that's a great question.
And the impact of the shedding the load.
Yeah, and that's the intent of a demand response program, is to find these high hours, have some sort of signal that can be sent either to the customer. In some cases, the customer sees that price signal themselves, and there's an agreement or a program in place to do that. I think right now we have a crypto demand response in place that is in a pilot status. But the intent is to actively investigate more demand response, because that's something that when you look out over all of our options to alleviate that short position that we identified, that's one that we have a high degree of control over. We can make the step forward to do those things. We don't necessarily have to go to the market and see if somebody can deliver it to us.
You know, to add a little bit more to that too, in terms of the effect on cost of service, if we, excuse me, if we were to implement some of those programs, what they end up doing is taking off some of the peaks, and that has a big effect for us because a lot of our assets end up being priced at the peak. We've got to build for the peak, and if we don't have to build for as high a peak, it reduces the costs ultimately that we need to charge to our customers. Now, that cost, depending upon whether we're talking about transmission or distribution or generation, gets allocated in the current cost of service, and ultimately could result in lower costs for all of our customers, but in varying degrees, depending upon how they use the system. Excuse me. The other part is that we offer financial incentives on the demand response program. The pilot that we're offering right now, the intention certainly would be to do it for other customers too. And so there's a immediate price, money back for those customers that are willing to enroll in those programs.
Rich Flanagan, you have a comment?
Just a plug, a plug for the integrated resource plan. We are modeling demand response, crypto demand response in our modeling, so you'll see a scenario of demand response. So we'll be able to see how it fits in with our other resource picks. Integrated resource. Show up for the public hearing, we hear more about
Is that this summer?
These amendments in May.
I think it's in the second half of May. Yeah.
Second.
Okay.
And our crypto demand response pilot should be running this summer. We should have opportunities to use it this summer.
Excellent. Okay, well, hopefully, Jimmy, that answered all of your questions. And unless, Ty, do you have any other closing words?
Who do I contact?
One more from Jimmy.
One more, yeah.
Jimmy, who do I contact to get involved in the pilot program? You can contact publicaffairs@gcpud.org, and we will connect you with the right person. So publicaffairs@gcpud.org.
Take another minute or two, just in case there are
Okay.
more questions. Got a plug for the QR code.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thanks again. We appreciate you coming and chatting with us. This is an important conversation to have. And we will be having a wrap up on June 4th, report back the things that we have found and how we're going to go forward. So we hope you join us then. Thank you all and good night.
That's all.
Thank you.